We've analyzed the offensive line, we've broken down the pass catchers. Now, the most critical piece of the puzzle for building around Tyler Shough, fixing the running game. Saints finished near the bottom of the NFL in rushing offense in 2025, and they had the 31st run blocking line as graded by PFF. That puts too much pressure on any NFL quarterback, much less a developing rookie. So today we're in the film room to answer the hardest question of the offseason. How do we fix it? We got to start by answering three important questions about the current running back room. What do they have in Alvin Kamara? Do we have another RB1 option on the roster? And what are the floors and ceilings of our young running backs? I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So let's take a look at the numbers because we gotta kind of have to understand 2025 before we start planning for 2026. So on your screen is production from our five running backs that are still on the roster: Kamara, Neal, Miller, Estime, and Hall. Now, looking at this group as a unit, two things kind of jump out. Is first the volume. So Alvin Kamara carried the heaviest workload. He led in most categories, and it was mostly due to that volume of that heavier workload. He unfortunately included leading the team in fumbles and drop passes. But second, or the running back room, not the team. Second, the efficiency numbers are kind of all over the place in both who has the team lead and separation between players' numbers. Alvin was the most efficient at 10 plus yard runs in both the total number and the percentage of his carries. So Estimate led in average yards per carry and average yards per catch. Miller had that insane 3.6 yards after contact, and the longest two runs of the year were from Estimate at 32 yards and then next Neal at 28 yards. So, biggest takeaway that I have from this is that Alvin Kamara, I think we all agree is going through. Look, you can't beat Father Time. It's a little decline due to age and amount of years in the league. But he was still your most by far consistent production. And Audric Estime likely would have been close, but he only played in 6 games, about a third of the season. If he gets 17 games in, I feel like he would be real close to the production Alvin was on pace to produce in for 17 games before he got injured. Miller and Neal have their own unique skill sets in some areas that allow them to flash at times, but I don't think they provide any real consistency, at least right now. So, what do the Saints have with Alvin Kamara? I think looking at the 2025 numbers, that when Alvin is on, he still has a burst. He's still capable of big plays. Led the team in 10 plus yard runs, which are considered explosive runs, and 13% of his attempts went for those 10 plus yard runs. By far, both categories are the highest on the team. He was still a dangerous weapon when we could get him to open space, and he did better at that than any other running back on the roster. But I think there's somewhat of a decline that's kind of showing up in some of the details. 3 fumbles, uncharacteristic of Alvin. Lowest average yard per rush, and lowest average yard per catch he's ever had in a season in his career. That's a 9-year career. So I think that's kind of you're looking at going, there may be the start of a decline. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he's done. They are just kind of red flags that last year may not be an anomaly, but he might be at the start of the running back two portion of his career. And history tells us that running back ones, sometimes it's over like that. But there are cases, and Kareem Hunt is a very recent one, of where they kind of decline down gradually into RB2 numbers in production and can still give you a year or two of that without any problem. So if it is the start of a decline, it doesn't necessarily mean this is some type of lost cause that you have to move on from him. Now, I have to mention, in the case of moving on from Alvin, Alvin's a free agent in 2027 with a voided contract, which means there's only going to be dead money in 2027, no actual salary. It is very possible he won't be here after 2026, but 2026 is a get out year for the Saints on his contract. They can move on and get positive cap ramifications. Pre June 1st clears all his dead money and adds it to 2026. And creates about $350,000 in cap space for the Saints. Post June 1st, clears up about $8 million roughly on June 2nd of this year. Remainder is going to wind up as dead money in 2027. And I don't think this is a real option. I really, really don't. But if one side decides they want to move on, say the Saints decide, hey, we want to go after one of those top end free agent running backs because there's a couple out there. Or Alvin decides to do very similar to what Honey Badger did last year and just go, I don't know if I can do this another year. I'm going to retire. It's just good to know that the option, either option existing, doesn't really cause the Saints any harm or hurt financially. But again, reiterating, I think this is a very, very low probable situation that he will not be here in 2026. But it was worth mentioning because I think everyone believes he can give us one more year, at least at RB2 and kind of a rotational piece. Now, whether he can return to running back one and be a bell cow, status is unknown, but I'm thinking probably not. Those days are probably behind him. But personally, and basing this on kind of what we saw in 2025 and in some of the numbers, I believe that RB2, without a doubt, and a very good one at that, is still in his tank. And I hold out hope he can have one more year of an RB1 and be that Alvin that we saw the first 8 years of his career. But you combine that with the fact that he's a veteran leader of this offense, in my opinion, and the Saints are gonna believe, and I think rightfully so, that it's a decline beginning and not a collapse finishing in his case. And I expect Alvin to bring production to this team in 2026. Just maybe not as the guy that's going to carry the primary workload. A lot like Cam Jordan last year did on defense, kind of try to limit his plays and then make sure he's on the field and you use him when you really, really need a running back one type big play. Do we have another running back one option on the roster? And what are the ceilings or floors of the young running backs on the roster? I think those two questions can kind of be answered at the same time if by looking at each individual player. And let's start with Kendre Miller. Look, when he runs, he's effective. 3.6 yards after contact is an elite number and kind of needed behind a bad run blocking line. He's hard to tackle, equally as hard to keep on the field. And there's the problem. It's only 21 games out of a possible 51 for his career that he's actually played in. And look, financially, if we cut him in 2026, he contract carries a $1.5 million cap savings for the Saints. So there's just a really, really good chance they're going to move on from him before we even make it to minicamp. My opinion and best guess. Don't know that for sure. So while he can do some stuff that teeters on running back one, best ability is availability, and that's something he struggles with. To kind of move to Estime is the next guy I want to look at. And I think when you look at him, you see a power runner who does have some ability to create his own space. He displayed that on the longest run of the season that he had, the 32-yard touchdown run against the Titans, where everything was bottled up and he was able to get outside and then make a play. Look, he's a downhill physical runner. And I think he would be more favorable in gap and inside run schemes, something we dabble with, inside zone runs, excuse me, something we dabble with. But I think, and this will come a little later, if solve the offensive line issue, some of this stuff will really work itself out in his favor about being able to run more gap. Something I do think Kellen Moore wants to do. But more important, he shows skills in catching the ball out of the backfield, especially check down and screens, kind of his bread and butter from what we saw in those last 6 games. And look, he gives you 3.28 yards after contact. So given a lot of indication he has a lot of that same ability from Kendra Miller, which is just basically you can hit him, but it's still really difficult to get him on the ground. So, as I said earlier, if he could reproduce anywhere along those numbers that he did for 6 games over 17 games, I think he would have a real opportunity of reaching the running back one status. So I think that's a ceiling, at least for now, you can look at and go, we might be able to get him there. Now, Devin Neal, versatile runner. In 2025, what I liked, what I saw was he ran with good vision and made good cuts, especially when the Saints were running him in zone schemes. Um, and he was very, very solid in the passing game. I think he's the opposite of estimating the fact that he's much less effective when you kind of go more to those power run schemes. I think he's going to be a really good, and I think he's already proven he's a really good third down receiving back with enough skills to use as a depth runner. So you can come in and get some carries if you need him to. So I think that puts him kind of in solid number two um, category for a running back, and a pretty solid backup that the Saints can count on. But they're going to have to continue to evaluate and develop him and see if we can get that floor to meet a ceiling where, much like Estime, he's got a chance to be an RB1. Not quite sure he's there yet, but coming off his rookie season, there's always hope you can get him closer to that. So I think for both those two running backs, seem solidly RB2s. And I think estimate for now the higher ceiling of both of them with ability maybe to get within side of an RB1 type workload in production. Now, we haven't talked about Evan Hall basically at all. And I want to say this first and foremost. I respect and love the way he played the game in his games here because every time I saw him on the field, no matter what they were using him for, it seems like he brought 110% max effort every time he set foot on the field. But I think at best right now, he's a practice squad running back and use in case of emergency player, much like we had to use him when he was active on game days in 2025. He might have a better chance of making the 53-man roster and being more active on game days if he can bring a lot of special team ability. And we did use him some in the kick return game, but overall, cover and return, then that emergency running back is sitting on the back end of your game day roster just in case something bad really happens and go, okay, we've got a guy we can press in the service. He's going to give us a hard effort and see if we can get some production out of him. But overall, I suspect if we see him in 2026, it will be as a practice squad player, and not sure if we would ever really see him on game day other than emergency situation. So overall, Miller is your best chance at an RB1, but more than likely it's going to be with another team because I really think that his chances probably are drying up really fast right now. Estimate very good running back two, probably the best chance of reaching a running back one status at least right now. Neil solid running back two, back up with some potential, and that potential just needs to keep being more developed. See where we can get his ceiling to, and then Hall special teamer, emergency running back type scenario at best case. This brings us to basically we're going to have to add at least one running back. We're going to start at free agency because free agency happens before the draft. Now, there will be some limits to the budget, or should be. And I think everybody in the front office realizes that. But kind of a quick look at the free agency list. It's a crowded free agency in running backs, assuming none of these players get re signed by their present teams. Brees Hall leads the way. J.K. Dobbins, Kenneth Walker, top three guys. And the number you're looking at there is Spotrax, a website that kind of follows average value of salaries. And they're projecting Hall leads the pack at looking at making 10.3 million a year. So 2-year contract total would be 20.6 million, and most of it guaranteed. And I think Hall and Dobbins and Walker all kind of fall into the top end of the category. I mean, you kind of have a middle tier, and I think Rashad White and Javonte Williams, who's also in that 7.3 range, kind of bottom of that first group, beginning of the second. And you kind of see where those numbers are. And I think that's where the Saints might actually fall in an area of looking at like a Travis Etienne or Rico Dowdle, if those numbers kind of hold. I think very, very workable. Then you kind of get to the lower end. Harris, um, Kenneth Gainwell, Tyler Algier would be there at 1.8 million. And I will mention this, that I feel like that would be a bargain if the 1.8 million for Tyler Algier holds. Crazy to think that a guy that was an RB1 until they drafted Bijan Robinson is not being looked at as highly as some of the other names on this list. And that running back list, that's a partial. There's other names, Kareem Hunt, um, Jeremy McNichol, several others that are kind of interspersed in between those kind of three low, mid, and high tier as far as salary that you're bringing in. And my biggest question is, I don't know how much outside of Brees Hall. I think he's amazing when he's healthy, but outside of him, I don't know if the money separation equals the talent separation. So we're going to work on a limited budget when it comes to bringing in a running back. I think there's some very good choices to kind of pull in there, but the reason why I say limited budget is, um, in my reality, and I think this is the reality we live in this situation, we need to fix the interior offensive line. And I think if we spend big on a guard free agency, like I suggested in the first video on the offensive line, it may seem like bargain hunting, looking for a veteran running back on this list, but I think that's a better option if you anchor that and secure that interior offensive line going that route than laying $10 million on Brees Hall or 9 million on Kenneth Walker. So build that wall and look to free agency, spend money on the O line, but still supplement with a veteran running back. And like I said, Travis Etienne, Rico Dowdle, Tyler Algier, that would be some of the guys I'd be looking at. Now, if you can't make any, because you just can't land them, significant moves to upgrade the offensive line, then I think by necessity you may have to start looking at signing one of those bigger name guys. That's why we're going to talk about free agency first, because I think that's what everything hinges on, what you're going to do. Can you get like a David Edwards at left guard, which makes signing a Brees Hall kind of hard to do, but not really as important. So to me, the best case scenario right here, talking to free agency, get the money spent in rebuilding an actual NFL level offensive line. That way you can pair Kamara with a reasonably priced veteran free agent. So you're not relying on Kamara to be the RB1. You have some help to bring in as a veteran. Allows you to keep using Estime and Neal. There'll still be some primary backups and some get some usage, but also continue for the Saints to develop both of them. The injury issues to be able to help with that, but also build in the future over the next couple of seasons with those guys and see what you really, really have. And if you do that, you may be looking to supplement the room still in the draft. If at some point in the draft you have a really good value at a running back at your pick and you're able to take him, something that they should have on their board and keep into consideration. Now, specifically about the draft, if I knew for sure this would happen, I would tell you this is the way to go. Jeremiah Love. He's right now the only quote unquote tier one or really first round prospect that they're looking at a running back. To me, if he's sitting there at 8, he's a no brainer for the Saints, no matter what we do in free agency. But I think if you would be able to land him at 8, and this presents you now, instead of the best case scenario, you have the best case scenario because it looks like you've rebuilt that offensive line with high level NFL talent. Now you grabbing Love to be your RB1 of the future and pair him with Kamara. And man, if this goes really well for you, you may have the rebirth of an Ingram Kamara role back in the day with two RB1s just terrorizing defenses. That veteran free agent that you brought in, since you didn't spend a lot of money on him and using him as a primary backup, and if Kamara, for some reason, the decline is worse than we thought, he would be able to slide in that role. You still have Estime and Neal help out in injury cases, still some primary backups, and still the opportunity to continue to develop them. So the best case scenario, but especially the best case scenario, or why I have said and started the three videos about building around Tyler Shough, starting with the offensive line, specifically starting with that left guard, beefing up that interior and get your run blocking and your running game better there, and then work back towards the backfield. Now, if we were to happen to miss him on day one, but still are looking to add a good solid prospect at running back looking into day two, or this would fall into one of those categories where we stumble across a pick at a certain point that has just too much value at running back that we have to take him, kind of no matter what our running back board looks like. Some names that you're going to kind of look on that second day: um, Jonah Coleman from Washington, Jadarian Price, who was Love's backup, and prior to that, when Audric Estime was um, in his last year at Notre Dame, Price and Estime were actually committee backs. They worked tandem as combined RB1. Emmett Johnson in Nebraska, Katron Allen from Penn State, kind of to name a few who these are the ones that keep showing up in that day two area. I think this group, this second group looking in the day two, or just generally early second to late fourth area, the pre-draft process is going to do a couple of things. It's going to shuffle these names around and put them in more of an order. And I can almost promise you some of the names I just mentioned are going to fall off because of that. And some I didn't mention are going to replace them. So I think this is one of the areas where if you're watching anything going on pre-draft, one of the areas we need to keep an eye on. So the best case scenario at this point would be one of these guys supplementing in there, able to improve your running back room overall. May not be RB1, but maybe has that potential somewhere down the line also. But above all, you keep kind of restocking this room with young talent. And when you can get what everybody's thinking, a surefire thing right now in Love, Jeremiah Love, just go ahead and grab it and sort the rest out later. What do they have with Alvin Kamara? Very, very likely a high end running back, too. Still a chance to get back to that running back one production, but almost certainly will require a lot of workload. Um, is there another running back one option on the roster? Not likely. Mostly because Miller's unreliable if you keep him, and still I think there's a really good chance they won't. And estimate your best chance right now, but with only 6 games, I don't know if you can fully commit to that idea. So you're looking at, I think, the scenario where you're adding somebody, at least one, if not two running backs via free agency or draft, because the floors and the ceilings for those young running backs you already have on the roster. Estime and Neal, like we said, solid twos. Estime probably having the higher ceiling and a decent chance maybe to get to an RB1 type production level. But either way, they both need to stay, and the Saints need to continue to evaluate and develop them. Unfortunately, Evan Hall, practice squad, break glass in a case of emergency top guy. Special teams, probably the only real route he has of being on the main roster and insignificant on game days. So the fix to me is the Saints' priorities are fix the offensive line with legit NFL caliber linemen, especially at left guard through free agency. Add a free agent vet at running back, and if you fix that offensive line, you don't have to spend a lot of money and go get one of the top guys. But also make sure to keep your eye on that draft and looking to draft at another young running back. And regardless of what we do and how we do it up until this point, love sitting there at 8. I really think he's, depending on what else is there, but I would think if he makes it to 8, most of those guys are gone, and he's going to be your pick. Regardless, and reinforce, just keep your eyes on those day 2, even early day 3 guy value picks. You could still possibly find some improvement in the running back room from those areas. So to me, this is the plan. I would try hard to implement if I was the GM to get the running game going, and then to give that balance to that offense, and then really let Tyler Shough operate a balanced offense that's capable of running the ball. Until we see that, you're pulling the the card of what a lot of NFL teams have done over the last few seasons, which is put everything on your quarterback. And with the new solid defenses being played, kind of like what we're doing with Brandon Staley, it's getting harder and harder for the NFL quarterbacks to be able to do that. So fixing the running game, definite priority, and I think it can be done. It, it's it's got to be done, to be honest with you. So that's my plan. But I want to know yours. Hey, look, do we rely heavily on Alvin and not worry too much about running back and draft a free agency? Do we concentrate on Love, or is the big bucks going to the offensive line? Kind of whatever the situation plays out, how you think it would best suit the Saints. Let me know down in the comments. And this does conclude our 3 video series on building around Tyler Shough. Um, the other 2 I'll put here on the end cards. Make sure if you haven't seen them yet, you can click on them and go ahead and watch them. And stay tuned. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, especially notifications. So we will start looking at the defense in the next few videos and start breaking down what it looks like on that side and what we're going to need to do. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.